Alright, hello and welcome everyone. So today we're going to be going over literally all of the companions that are worth going over. We have had two kind of full reworks for the companions and a lot of changes have happened, so much so that there's actually a top 10, if you can believe it, in this video. And we're going to be going over just all of the relevant information about all of the companions, so that there's just one place where you can find what you're looking for, unless a new companion comes out, but I find that to be unlikely, at least for this year. With that, we are going to be starting with relevant Sentinel weapons. We're going to be starting with relevant Sentinel weapons, and then we're going to move on to some honorable mentions, and then we will get into the proper top 10, like the useful companions that you're going to be using probably most all the time. The Sentinel weapons are first because these are going to be used on all of the Sentinels that we're going to talk about, and I'd rather not go over them each and every time I go over each and every Sentinel. So, with that, we're going to be starting with the Volklock, which Taxon will be showing off for us. The Volklock is very simple. The reason it's on this list is because it is for new players, and its build is stock simple. This is a build that you can put together with no Forma and no Catalyst, and the build for Diriga, spoiler alert, is also going to be a no reactor, no Forma build, because it is far and away the best thing for new players. Good thing too, Diriga and the Volklock come as a package deal for new players to access. The reason this build is good is because of just the way Diriga works, where we have, of course, on the Volklock, we're on viral electricity and radiation, with the viral being supplied here and the radiation coming from radiated reload. Worth noting that if you do get access to some of the other cheaper mods, the like dual stats, you can use like unleveled, like malignant forces and stuff like that in order to not need radiated reload if you're not quite at that content yet. But also, this build will work just fine if you just have infected clip and cryo rounds and point strike. Going to be a-okay. The important things about this weapon for the purposes of Diriga using it are that it gets over 50% crit chance, so you can activate Tenacious Bond, which we're going to talk about a lot in this video, and then just whatever elements you want. On a more fully invested version of this build, you're looking at something like this. And the real stuff here is that like you really don't need the Serration. It's just kind of, you know, getting that crit plus whatever elements you happen to want, and then usually a set mod setup. So in this case, we're on like double vigilante mods, which is going to give us that 10% chance to enhance our critical hits, which is good considering part of this weapon's purpose is giving us Tenacious Bond, so we are going to be on critical hits. But then we're also getting heat, magnetic, and radiation, which is a pretty universal application that you can really use anywhere and is always going to be good. But for newer players, this setup is very, very tough to beat. Lots of highly accessible mods that I would really advise to everyone. With that, we can move on to two of our less important ones, which is going to be Burst Laser Prime and Laser Rifle Prime, both much harder to get. We're going to be talking about the one that I think is worse first, which is the Burst Laser Prime. Part of the reason, notably, that I think that this is worse is that it takes 5 Forma to put this build together. And also, so I don't have to go over it every time, notably, the Galvanized mods do not work inherently on the Sentinel weapons. With that, if you proc them on your actual weapons, they then work for your Sentinel weapons while it's procced on your weapons that you're actually holding on your Warframe. So, if you get a single kill with a pistol, it's pretty significantly better than just, you know, regular old barrel diffusion. So I do keep galvanized diffusion on here, but it's definitely not worth, you know, putting things like galvanized shot and crosshairs or anything like. Definitely not crosshairs. Crosshairs doesn't work at all on here. This is a pretty expensive build. It is pretty decent at killing enemies. A notable thing about the burst laser is it is always firing. There's basically no downtime with this weapon, which is a benefit. And it also is like full IPS. It's puncture, slash, and impact, and whatever elements you put on there. So for the purposes of getting like IPS, if you need that for whatever reason to be primed on enemies, it can absolutely do that for you. So that is just, you know, a number of different things here. But the important stuff is it allows Tenacious Bond, and it's actually also pretty good at killing enemies, if a bit on the expensive side. Also, of course, it uses secondary mods, which are, you know, can be uniquely good, like if you need the auger sets or something of that nature. For the Prime Laser Rifle, this is a much cheaper build. It uses primary mods, and it is kind of the, you know, stock standard primary build that we have together. Again, unless you are using it to kill enemies, you really don't need Serration. It also does have the full IPS. We're on that, you know, viral heat, all that good stuff. Again, this one, my testing has just been better for killing stuff, and it's also only 2 Forma instead of 5. So if you do have access to this weapon, and you might want to get Worm, so it might be a lot easier to access too, it's just going to be pretty good at killing, and also can activate Tenacious Bond. So if you need Tenacious Bond, and also you need your Sentinel to shoot a guy, this is pretty much going to be the place you're going to head to if you can access this. But notably, if you only have access to the other Prime, that's going to be totally fine as well. Moving on, we have the two big ones that you're probably going to use way more than anything else on this list, at least once you have access to them, starting with the Verglass Prime. So the Verglass we have here. This is your one-stop shop for killing enemies. This is the Sentinel weapon that is actually good. This is the setup for it. It is very worth noting that if you're not using Fired Up on your Sentinel, you will instead want to include thermite rounds instead of Rifle Elementalist. It is significantly worse than just finding space for Fired Up in your Sentinel's build. But if you can't, then you can't. Rifle Elementalist is a very large damage increase if you did manage to do that, though. And this weapon will absolutely just obliterate Steel Path enemies. We are going to be showing like just what Nautilus does whenever we actually get to him, because of course he's on the top 10. But yeah, this is the weapon I'll be referring to for the purposes of actually killing enemies as a primary objective. And then finally, the weapon that is probably going to be used by most of your Sentinels, that's going to be the Tazakor. So the Tazakor has entirely usurped the purpose of the Hellstrom in the past, and while the Hellstrom is still fine and can totally still be used for all the stuff it was being used for, the Tazakor is a chaining beam weapon that is just so stellar for getting hits on enemies, which means assists, which is going to be important for a number of our Sentinels, and also it can have such high status, and the chaining means that you can do this setup. This setup includes some mods that you may honestly have never even seen before, Shivering Contagion and Continuous Misery. So Shivering Contagion is on cold status effects, 100% chance to spread that status to other enemies within 6 meters. This works off of every enemy in the chain of your weapon. So putting cold on this weapon, you see we're on a cold corrosive radiation, which is a pretty solid setup. Combined with Continuous Misery means that your Tazakor will fire out from your Sentinel and completely hard crowd control all of the enemies in front of you or down a hallway behind you or whatever it happens to be looking at. This also extends to putting a huge slow on Demolus, essentially giving them Nova slow whenever you're near them, which is excellent for, all the game mode there. And anything like that is vulnerable to cold at all, you will get a benefit from this. Of course, this also, because you're freezing enemies so consistently, is going to give you that crit buff as well, which is more minor. But it is a damage up if you are using critical weapons, which is a pretty big boost as well, and can kind of make up for the fact that you are not going to be getting Tenacious Bond, and you definitely never will with this weapon in particular. But it is absolutely stellar. I've used this on most of my Sentinels. It's honestly the thing that has made me most consider totally dropping, going after Tenacious on a number of my different Sentinels. It is very, very good. We can show that one off here with Taxon, and just pop in these enemies here. You can see just how effectively just frozen. Like the whole front line here, like 10 enemies, maybe a couple more actually, just completely frozen nearly instantly, and like that's just what your Sentinel will be going around and doing. In addition to that, of course, this is 3 elements, so they are primed for Manifold Bond, which means if your Sentinel has any abilities that need their cooldown reduced, all the enemies that they're chained to are going to be reducing the cooldown of all of those abilities, and it is just phenomenal. It is like the ultimate in just like raw crowd control, support, utility weapons for Sentinels, and in my mind, there's just nothing that's going to come close to beating that anytime soon, unless we get another companion rework, which I don't foresee. With that, we can talk about a few other things. The honorable mentions category. So these are just kind of too niche, I felt, to really be included in the top 10. They do all have their place, but they're just so specific to really particular things to be doing. The first of which is probably the most general, actually, which is the Smita doing a thing that we, are kind of always doing, maybe, especially for like a lot of newer players. The Smita was changed, of course. The double loot was ripped out and has turned into Resourceful Retriever with the last rework, so that's available for all of our Beast companions. So with that, the Smita lost that. Lost that in that they just also equip this now. It's no longer unique to them. And Charm instead does have a 3 times affinity bonus on it, which is pretty good if you're farming, if you're farming focus, or if you are just like leveling up a bunch of items. That can be really helpful, but that's where the Smita Kavat shines. And as you can see, this build is a little on the expensive side, so I don't know if you're really going to be wanting to like forma up a Smita just for the purposes of getting all of that additional affinity. Though, if you were going on like a huge tear and leveling stuff and like, like jumping like 10 mastery ranks or something, it could really shorten the amount of time you're spending leveling. which could be a really big boon. So that's worth noting for the Smita, that you can utilize it for those purposes now, but it's definitely not going to be a thing that we're just using constantly forever anymore, because the reason for that has now been moved to all of our beast companions. Moving on, we have Helios and Oxalis. Helios and Oxalis are going to be kind of like similar in that Helios is very, very simple. Basically, there's one deal here: Investigator. Filling out your codex if you want enemies to test in the simulacrum, or if you just want that codex completion in general, if that's what you're after. Helios is, of course, the best thing for that. A lot of people bring him to new content, myself included, to get that codex filled up to be able to test and do, just have the list, have the completion go burr. And if that is what you are seeking, Helios is the place to get that. In addition to that, I would suggest actually including spare parts. It's, of course, nothing compared to the Beast Companion resource doubler, but more loot is more loot, and if you're doing new content and filling out your codex with Helios, you probably also want the new loot that almost certainly drops from them as well. And of course, it's not hard to get Tenacious Bond active on here. Just throw your Volklock over here onto Helios, and you can also get a nice crit buff. Otherwise, this is a pretty stock standard, just generic Helios build. You're also getting Primed Animal Instinct to find the loot in the new place that you are, where you're probably getting Investigator scans and so on and so forth. So that's what Helios is up to. And then even more niche, even more specific, we have Oxalis. Oxalis is just, hey, are you going fishing? He'll show you where all of the hotspots are and automatically apply Luminous Dye. Hey, that's really good for fishing. Unfortunately, the nightmare is that this is locked behind rank 5 Fortuna for some god knows why reason. So the point where it would be really, really useful, which is, Deimos and PoE and Fortuna fishing, you get it at basically the thing you're going to finish last of the 3 of those if you're doing all of them, so it makes it considerably less useful. In addition to that, you can get Botanist, which will cause it to, give you some of the plants and all that business. And then Scan Matter, which was changed in the recent kind of rework of the companions. This, unfortunately, is line of sight. If it was non-line of sight, I think there'd be a pretty strong argument for just, having Oxalis around to just, get things that you would otherwise miss, as the range is pretty considerable. But with it being a line of sight restriction, there's kind of no reason to do that. And then we have the usual suspects for the rest of the build. So this is something that you'll finish Fortuna, maybe get it and build it, and then keep it in your inventory for whenever fishing comes up again, which is really unfortunate. I would really love to see this moved in terms of being much earlier for newer players to be able to help them along, learning how fishing works, as it would be really convenient for that, but it's just not where Oxalis is. So those of us that are much more experienced will use it as a convenience item instead. With that, we can now finally get into the actual top 10, starting with the Hounds and the Harath Kubrow. So, to go over the Hounds first here at number 10, the Hounds, in general, they're all the same. It doesn't matter which one you do, they're pretty much all just going to be identical. They have some statistical differences, like the shields are the important bit here, as you don't want one with less than 350 shields, but mostly they will have over 350 shields. And the reason you want them to have over 350 shields is so that they can use Reinforced Bond if you want that buff. But other than that, they're pretty much all completely identical. And this is going to be the build on all of them, as the Prospectus, Denial, and Audit mods can be used no matter what kind of Hound it is. So this is the setup for the Hound. Synergized Prospectus is, I think, the clear winner in terms of the Prospectus mods. Repo Audit is not the clearest winner in the world for the audits, as the audits do have a few things that you can kind of mess with. Some people do really like the Null Audit for turning off XMI. Me personally, I'm not so big on that. The Equilibrium one is kind of a consideration, but Repo is just so much more consistent for me. And then Reflex Denial is kind of the only game in town in terms of making your Hound more survivable, which you will absolutely need. Otherwise, Contagious Bond plus Manifold Bond means that all of your abilities are proccing a ton of statuses, whatever statuses you have equipped on your weapon for the Hound. And then Contagious Bond is spreading all those statuses when the enemy dies. And then in addition to that, Momentous Bond means that you are stealing new elements from the XMI that you are killing, and Vicious Bond is stripping the armor off of enemies. Comes together for a very aggressive package for dealing with groups of enemies, and can do quite a bit on its own. The melee build is this here. Healing Return is here because it does have some trouble surviving sometimes, but I think regardless of missing out on a DPS mod, you'll still be pretty impressed with what it can actually do. We'll just have it for these guys. Its wave goes out, it procs all of the statuses that are on its weapon. It fires out that orb there, as you saw. And basically, as soon as it gets one kill, you'll quickly note that everyone dies. But, you know, just in general, it's kicking out some pretty good damage. These are Steel Path level 120 enemies. It's not bad. When they fight back is whenever the Hound can have more problems. So protecting the Hound is kind of like the main deal. But if you need, like, you know, a companion to help out with EPS and you're like more of a support Warframe, like if you're, say, like a Trinity, especially because we know she's not getting any real damage in the coming updates, Trinity can really help, you know, a Hound be able to do more of its effective damage. Just any support in general can really accomplish that. But yeah, that's, if you're looking for a DPS on 4 legs, I personally would say that this is what you're looking for unless you absolutely need that double loot mod, because unfortunately, being mechanical, this is not a beast, so you cannot equip that mod. But that is what is up with the Hounds. I think they're, like, at least pretty interesting overall. It's really the survivability that is a huge, huge downside. Moving on to something that is extremely survivable, we have the Hurras Kubros. The Hurras Kubros are pretty much dead simple. So this, you get Stalk instead of Ghost. Obviously on Sentinels, you can get Ghost and all that business. Stalk is basically just the purely better version of that because it's on the Hurras Kubro. The Hurras Kubro has a very easy time activating Tenacious Bond and Reinforced Bond. So you get a, of course, crit buff plus a large fire rate buff for pretty much free. You get the double resources, and then Stalk is just giving you invisibility as long as you are a Warframe that mostly does what they do through abilities. So if you're a Warframe like Korra or Atlas or Grendel, you can just DPS while perma-invis as long as there's an enemy kind of near you most of the time, which is very, very safe. And that is kind of what the Hurras offers. Generally, for me personally, I don't like this playstyle and like think it's a little inconsistent at times whenever I really wish it was more. But it is still quite effective and makes the list pretty easily. You can, of course, just use the Sentinel version of this as well with Shade. Also worth noting, I do have Scavenge on here. And the main reason for that is I don't really see the value of applying anything else here. Like, if you're a melee Warframe, maybe you apply Prime Pack Leader for more protection. You could just, like, add Vitality or whatever else, but you should be invisible all the time if you're using this. So it's kind of a tough call on what to throw in here. And also, whenever we look at the weapon, you'll see why there's no offensive bonds in here, as we are not going to be having this pet ever attack if we can help it. That's also why they're not using their other precept that makes them attack, because there's just no reason to ever have this pet be aggressive. In terms of the claws, all that we're doing here, elusive posture, 50% evasion. They do not attack unless provoked. Thank goodness they will mind their damn business and not get themselves in trouble, which is going to be a running theme with all of our 4-legged companions. Bite is, of course, here along with Hunter Synergy to make sure that we get over that critical chance, although on this you only need Bite. It is worth noting that if you want to, you can throw in some mecha stuff. If you are looking to do that set, you can just like toss that in here. In general, I don't see a ton of value in the mecha set, but I have it on a couple different companions trying out things. But mostly, these are like the important mods. On any of the Kubros, this is pretty much going to be what you're going to see outside of the Sunica, which didn't even make the list because it's not worth it. And pretty much on this, you just need Elusive and Bite to a level where you're over 50% crit, and that's what's going on. Moving on to our number 8 and number 7, we have the Adarza and the Chesa Kubro. Another couple of 4-legged ones here. We have the Adarza. The Adarza, pretty simple here. They offer a unique buff in Cat's Eye, which grants 60% critical chance. It is final critical chance, notably, which means it just raw adds at the end of calculation. So if at the end of your modding you have 20% crit, when Cat's Eye is active, you have 80% crit on that weapon, which is a very, very solid buff. And like very hard to beat in terms of finding that buff elsewhere. It's usually like a Warframe exclusive buff or on like Arcane Avenger, which is quite rare. So this is an extremely powerful buff. With your tech mods, this has about a 60% uptime, so it is not 100% uptime, which I would have really liked to see and probably could have made this rate a little bit higher. But also on the Adarza, it's really easy to activate Tenacious. So you also get that final crit damage multiplier to go with the chance, so you can actually really turn anything into a crit weapon if you bring in a Adarza. Then they have Reflect for like a little more theoretical survivability, but in, you know, they don't have the shields, unfortunately, for Reinforced Bond. So they're basically just offering big crit buffs for you, and that is pretty much what their whole job is. They are good at it, though. It's a unique buff that I think was worth noting here. On this, once again, Elusive and Bite. You can try and build them for damage. We will, you know, have claw builds later on in this for, you know, ones that are going to actually be hitting guys. But I do not think that you should be doing that with the Adarza. It is just not worth, like, having them attack enemies and then just get shot and die, which is what happens at any kind of significant level. Moving on, we have, of course, the Chessa. The Chessa replaces the Smeda's purpose. The Chessa is now the premier for more loot, please. In that, of course, they can equip the new... where's it at? Brain. A Resourceful Retriever. Forgot its name for a moment there. They can equip the new Resourceful Retriever, so you get that 20% chance for double resource pickups. And you get Retrieve, which is like the mini Necros ability. So you basically just have Necros Dog following you around and sometimes desecrating enemies. Well, of course, giving you this nice 20%. Other than that, this is basically like, what else can you do in terms of the build? You've got like the mecha stuff going on here. Mystic Bond is here for sometimes getting free abilities, and otherwise it's like some survivability and kind of just, you know, Tenacious Bond making it work. Getting what we can out of the Kubro. Another one that it's very unfortunate that we do not get Reinforced Bond, although that might be maybe a little too good because it is, of course, a loot dog. In general, though, if you are purely looking for more loot, the Chessa is going to be the best thing you can get. Of course, you see the mecha stuff here, Bite and Hunter Synergy. It is worth noting you do need that here. And then we have, or rather, you don't need that here. You do not need that here. We have Elusive Posture as well, so it stays out of trouble because we don't want it to be attacking. But yeah, doing mecha stuff is also like kind of another little thing that Chessa can do. It's better than nothing, but hopefully it's mostly just doing its loot job. Moving on from that, we have our next two, which is, well, I guess you'll see the next three. Next up, we have Worm. Worm is excellent. I've really enjoyed Worm a ton, and the main reason for that is just that Worm gives you status immunity. In addition to the other, like, wonderful defensive buffs that you can have on Worm, we get Negate, which is preventing status effects from applying to its owner once every 5 seconds. This cooldown is affected by Manifold Bond. So if you're doing Manifold Bond things with the Tazakor, that basically means that you're going to be functionally completely status immune all of the time, which is a really nice thing to be able to add to whatever Warframe you want. Certain Warframes really, really hate it when they get status effects applied to them. Looking at you, Zaku, Korra, so on and so forth, in terms of like squishy, aggressive Warframes. Worm can really help boost up their survivability, and that is, of course, compounded with a Reinforced Bond and Calculated Redirection for that 60% fire rate, which matters on a number of Warframes. And, of course, Guardian spam from Manifolding so aggressively, which is just all comes together to be a very, very good package of defensive things to be offering. Guardian spam plus Negate keeps you safe from, honestly, most threats in the game, so as long as your Warframe is killing, it gets considerably harder to die. With that, like I said, suggestion, the Tazakor is definitely what I would suggest in terms of weaponry, and we can move on to the Sahasa. So, the Sahasa, recently, thankfully fixed, is our portable Protea dispensary. How this works is Dig will give you what you need. And what that means is that before your Kubro does Dig, they check to see what you're actually missing. If you're low on health, they will give you health orbs. If you're low on energy, they will give you energy orbs. If you do not have ammo, they will give you ammo. So, whatever it is that you currently need, you will be given by Dig, and it will dig pretty much as often as it can unless you're totally topped up on everything. Don't expect it to be digging up resources that you have no need of, as it is checking you basically to see what you could use. Other than that, Tenacious, Resourceful Retriever, you're just kind of general good stuff. I do have Mecha Recharge on here as well, adding into survivability and a little extra thing for the Sahasa to do. But overall, pretty simple stuff. On the Sahasa clause, once again, we're on really simple stuff. You do absolutely have to have Hunter Synergy here in order to reach that 50% crit chance. So, you know, you need at least some crit on your weapon in order to get over that hump, but that's pretty simple. And then Elusive Posture to keep yourself out of trouble. Just to show really quickly how this works, you'll see the Sahasa will basically just check and then dig up some energy. There should be 3 energy orbs at this rate. Was 2 and some credits. I think there is maybe a little variance on it. It's usually 3 though, and you can see like just the time between that. Should in a moment here dig up some more energy. Do it. Thank you. So as you're running around the mission, there's 75. It's pretty much just going to be that at a pretty consistent rate. It's not the highest energy income that you can get, but it is totally passive in that you're not having to go hunt around for energy orbs. You're not going to have to like count on the enemies to drop them. You're always going to have a pretty like even amount of energy that's always going to be given to you, which you can count on in an energy economy. This is especially good for Warframes like Mirage, who might be further away from the action and only go over occasionally to pick up loot. You know, with her extremely large range and such like that. And it's really useful for like You know, Mirage, as I stated, and also Warframes like Gara, who sometimes kill enemies at such a large range away from themselves that they just don't see them for a while. And any kind of situation like that, Sahasa is going to be excellent for. And moving on, we have Diriga. So Diriga, obviously, we've talked about Diriga a little bit as being the best thing for new players, and it is absolutely, absolutely true that that is the case. We have this here as kind of the full-on build for Diriga. Obviously, Meta Ray is like a little bit to taste. You could replace this with like a lot of different things. A lot of people are probably going to go Primed Animal Instinct in that case if you do have it instead of Meta Ray, which will be a little bit more Forma investment. But otherwise, this is pretty much what you're looking at. What you're looking at is Diriga is going to spam Arc Coil. Arc Coil plus Manifold Bond. With Arc Coil's already very low cooldown, means you're just going to be instant spamming tons of statuses in a 10-meter radius around you, just instant priming pretty much every enemy you get near, which is going to instantly lower the cooldown of both Guardian and Arc Coil, allowing you to spam Arc Coil like crazy as long as there's an enemy nearby you. Combine that with Mystic Bond, and you get kind of an energy economy out of it, which is every time it uses 5 abilities, you get a free cast, which can be very, very impactful, especially on high energy cost abilities. And, of course, with the Vol Clock, you're very easily activating Tenacious Bond, so you are getting that crit bonus as well. Unfortunately, well, maybe with a Diriga Prime at some point in the future, not enough shields for Reinforced Bond. Just to very quickly show just kind of how this is going to look, and it's going to look this way even if you're a new player, with what kind of spread you can look at for Diriga. It looks like this. And this is without killing enemies, so this is without Manifold causing it to do this faster. But this is the pulse rate, and every 5 of these, you get a free ability cast, as you can see in the top right, that popping up, which is pretty impactful. Like, being able to just, like, cast for free, like, very aggressively, and just keep bringing that back is really, really nice. And, you know, it's a real energy economy. It's like, you know, stunning here with viral electricity, the radiation kind of like providing some safety because enemies will target other enemies that are under the effects of radiation. It is very, very good for new players. And of course, if you need certain elements on certain enemies, that is also, of course, a factor. And even if you give Diriga heat, if you have heat on the weapon for Diriga, it will turn on things like your secondary arcanes. Cascadia Flare is actually, like, you can power that up with Diriga and not even need to, like, keep tabs on it all the time if you're a Warframe that doesn't use your weapon a whole lot or doesn't inherently have heat procs. It's a way to access them. And in addition to that, if you can make room for Archon Stretch in your build, because Diriga's ability does do electric damage, it is an ability that does electric damage, so it procs Archon Stretch, giving you 2 energy per second, which is just really, really stellar overall. Cannot recommend Diriga enough to new players. It is definitely the thing I would go for as a companion. Pretty long-standing, unless you get lucky with a Sahasa or a Chessa from your, like, Kubro quest. I would really say that Diriga is something that you could, like, get and stick to for a very long time as a newer player. Moving on to our top 3. Those of you that know what companions we've all been using, you're going to be unsurprised by the top 3, I think. Starting with Deathcube. Deathcube, of course, has been a staple since the changes. Deathcube normally using the Tazakor, but is definitely a candidate for using like Burst Laser Prime and stuff like that, because if you don't need as much energy, you can afford to go that way and also get Tenacious Bond out of him. But otherwise, usually with the Tazakor being used, this is the build that I generally go for. This is doing Manifold stuff. Notably, it's doing Manifold stuff just for Guardian, so that we can have Guardian be, you know, available all the time. That's like the only reason Manifold is here. We don't actually even use the abilities of Deathcube because Vaporize is like totally not useful. But the unique thing that Deathcube does bring to the table is Energy Generator. So Deathcube drops an Energy Orb after assisting in 10 kills. With the Tazakor, it is so easy for Deathcube to be somewhat involved in 10 kills. If you're going for 100 KPM as a standard, generally speaking, every minute, this is like 6 energy orbs. Maybe if you want to be conservative with that, it's like 4 energy orbs, but that's 100 additional energy a minute. And that is without considering that it's also really easy for Deathcube to give you Synth Deconstruct as well, which is a 25% chance for health orbs if you have any kind of equilibrium effect on your build because you need that energy. Also, 25% of the enemies that Deathcube interacts with are also going to be giving you an energy orb, which is another huge increase in the energy that you're going to be getting. I will say most of the EDAs that I run, the Elite Deep Archimedes, I usually pivot towards bringing Deathcube, as it is, with the Tazakor, a very safe, crowd control option that provides me a absolute ton of energy. It is extremely, extremely good, and I use it all the time. Absolutely stellar. It is just so consistent. Just kind of can't go wrong with it. Like, if you can actually change your literal Warframe build and just take into account that you're bringing Death Cube, and that can make your build much greedier and have like a way higher top end if you go for that. And it, you know, speaks to the power of Death Cube that he's able to change your Warframe build by existing, I think. With that, there are two more on the list. And, of course, we've mentioned one of them earlier in the video. So, our next up on number 2 is Nautilus Prime. Now, Nautilus, I'm going to be honest with you. We grade Warframes yearly, pretty much. And Nautilus, unironically, if he had 2 legs and could walk around, could beat out some of the Warframes in terms of usefulness. Nautilus is absolutely incredible. Cordon takes enemies within 30 meters and just puts them into a ball on a relatively short cooldown. And with the Verglass, which is the weapon that Nautilus comes with, and this build, he will quickly dispatch any enemy he comes across that is sorta vulnerable to status. It is really, really crazy to watch this thing work. Unironically, Nautilus by himself, with just me standing around as a Warframe doing nothing on, you know, certain situations, can reach over 100 KPM, kills per minute. And it is crazy. With that, he also has shields for reinforced bonds, so you're getting that 60% fire rate. Of course, you could swap to a weapon that can also give you Tenacious, and then just like have Tenacious plus Cordon plus Reinforced, which is grouping plus damage plus crit, or plus damage plus crit. Grouping plus fire rate plus crit, which is just stellar to have all those bonuses together. It is absolutely phenomenal. And we are going to be showing that off here real quick, as I said we would earlier, because it's like kind of ridiculous. Here, let me... Pulled them slightly too soon. Here we go. Just groups of enemies quickly die. There you go. And it'll just, because it's applying enough statuses to trigger Manifold Bond, once it's killing a certain volume of enemies, it's actually just a 30-meter vacuum that sucks in all the enemies and then kills them all with Contagious Bond in a giant wave. Which is messed up, man. So yeah, Nautilus is crazy. If you need a companion that can handle the mission while you get up to grab a snack, Nautilus is that guy. He does not care. You know, he's wanted in every state for murder, and he's crazy with it. There's a number of game modes I'm not going to pretend that he can't just do alone. If you set him down, just like stand around somewhere, it is extremely, extremely good. And even outside of him being able to do a lot of shit himself, just spamming Cordon on enemies that you're, like, you know, getting the Manifold Bond down on, and just like having the grouping go burr with any of your just given AoE weapons or AoE abilities, or like like literally whoever you are, it's always valuable to have it be spamming the group up in pretty much all cases, and it's just crazy ridiculous. And there's only one thing more ridiculous than that, and of course that is the Panzerwelpe, which I have labeled here under purpose, if you're wondering what this column was, is universal. And the reason I have it labeled as universal is because, I'm going to be honest, the Panzer at the current state does literally everything. It does everything I could reasonably ask a companion to do, and it does all of it flawlessly with no qualms at all, and it is just so convenient, and the build is honestly not that expensive, and it's just wonderful. So, this is the build. It is 2 Forma, first and foremost, and in this build, you get Tenacious Bond for 1.2 critical damage multiplier. You get Resourceful Retriever for 20% of the time, rounding. Double resources. You get Reinforced Bond for 60% fire rate. You get Viral Quills for spreading viral everywhere. And in addition to that, Panzer Devolution means that all of these buffs and things are constantly active, because even if they die and go into larva form, all of the buffs stay on. So you're never losing access to your buffs from your pet being clumsy. And in addition to that, due to a way that the Viral Quills interact with your claw weapon, Viral Quills will also trigger Archon Stretch if you want to use that as part of your energy economy. which is crazy. Of course, obviously, we also have Primed Animal Instinct here and Fetch, the usual suspects. But this is just all of the super relevant buffs, extremely relevant status spreading, just excellent things all the way down. In terms of the claws, these are heavily overinvested. In terms of what you actually need here, you need a partially leveled bite to get over that 50% crit. You need a completely unranked shocking claws. You do not need the full bore. And then you need elusive posture. Because I've had a bunch of people question me on this, yes, you will still fire the quills of the Vulpa while in elusive posture, as it does not prevent ability use, and the quills are an ability. So, with this build, with just bite, an unleveled, like a partially leveled bite, an unleveled shocking claws, and an elusive posture, which you guessed it is a zero forma build, this will be able to generate energy for you if you're using Archon Stretch on your main Warframe, and also activate Tenacious and just all of the good stuff. Because seemingly some people just don't believe me whenever I say that under elusive it will use its quills. Here's the proof, I guess, because I keep having to do this on stream as well. So yeah, it does shoot the quills, just so we're all clear. Yeah, it does do that, and it does spread all of its statuses to enemies that are already affected, and so on and so forth. But yeah, the Vulpa is crazy, absolutely nuts, just absolutely stellar. It does it all, just, you know, resources, buffs, debuffing enemies, staying alive, and just constantly giving you all of those benefits. Really could not ask for more. Like, if the Panzer was also doing the damage output along with its safety of what Nautilus is capable of, we would have a situation where there just simply would not be other companions that are up for grabs, in my opinion. But thankfully, I think there's like a pretty healthy list of a top 10 here that, like, I'll use pretty frequently and swap around between, which is way better than the past, where we kind of, you know, had one companion on and off, sometimes two, for a number of years there. So I think the companions are in a much better place than they've really ever been in. Hopefully this video has been a nice, simple breakdown of all things companions that people can return to for a long time to get all of the information that they seek. But yeah, that's going to do it. If you want to see the notes in the top 10 itself, that's going to be down in the description, so go check that out. That's going to be up on the site, which I am, of course, working on. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
All right, we're back from TennoCon, and the Streamathon is going to continue. But there will, of course, I will try and have there be videos as well as the Streamathon at the same time, if I can. Also, thank you to the $10 patrons, Athean, Alex Parnham, Arbiter Daydream, Benuven, Brutus Salazar, Canalatra, Club 3, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, Afan, James Hearthstone, JC4 Science, Josh, Luzanth, Malik X Williams, Mark Smith, Mikakel, Minty Ginja, Mitchta, Nerve, Ruby, Sanyu, Skur, Sharp247, Tamrielic Wastelander, Tester ZWP, The Coupon of Death, Tomeworm, Victor Palmer, Waifu Wars, Wowdata1, and Sarah Fear. And of course, all of my other patrons as well. It is incredibly appreciated for all of your support. But yeah, we're gonna try and keep the videos a little bit more regular while the Streamathon continues. And of course, we do have a free-to-play through coming soon.